he's not involved in the matchmaking, he's not involved in these contract negotiations, he's more of this face. But to hear him say it under oath in a court of law, I think that is significant.
So here's what just dropped. Dana White walked into court and basically admitted he's not running the UFC anymore. After building this entire empire from the ground up, White sat in front of a federal judge and said he's completely removed from the day-to-day operations. No more contract negotiations, no more deciding who fights who. So if Dana's not calling the shots, who is? And what does this mean for the future of mixed martial arts? Let's dive into this.
Anytime there's a contract dispute, anytime there's a big fight that needs to be made, is Dana aware? Is Dana involved from afar? Sure. Is he on the front lines? No. That's according to all the managers and fighters that I've spoken to over the past 10 years.
White found himself in the U.S. District Court for Nevada on Wednesday, February 5th, 2026. He was stuck on that witness stand for over 2 hours because of two massive class action antitrust lawsuits, Johnson vs. Zuffa and Serkinov vs. Zuffa. Judge Richard F. Boulware II was overseeing the whole thing, and the focus was supposed to be on something called evidence spoliation. Basically, whether the UFC had been destroying or losing text messages and phone records they were legally required to keep since 2014. White talked about his phone's auto-delete features. He mentioned some device that got stolen in 2024. He even said he wants to switch back to a flip phone when all these lawsuits wrap up. But here's the thing, none of that technical stuff made headline. What blew everyone's mind was what he revealed about his actual job. When lawyers pressed White about his involvement in fighter contract negotiations, he said his participation was absolutely less than zero. He straight up told them, "You won't find one manager on this planet who will tell you I've negotiated a deal and I don't know how long." Then they asked about matchmaking, you know, the whole process of deciding who steps into the octagon for every UFC card. His response, he doesn't really handle that anymore either. He said both responsibilities now belong to Hunter Campbell, the UFC's chief business officer, working alongside matchmakers Sean Shelby and Mick Maynard. According to White, this shift happened after the UFC got sold to Endeavor back in 2016, and the Fertitta brothers stepped away. Ariel Helwani addressed the testimony on his show and pointed out that none of this should shock anyone who's been paying attention.
He might come in at the very end to close a deal. He might be involved in a Conor McGregor fight, but 99% of the fights are not put together by him. 99.9% of the contracts are not put together by him. And this is not an indictment on him. I've been telling you this for a very long time. He used to refer to Hunter Campbell as like his lawyer. He's much more than that. He is, as I've said before, the most important person in this company because of how hands-on he is.
White got really specific in court about just how disconnected he's become. He brought up a contract situation with featherweight champion Ilia Topuria right before a 2025 fight against Charles Oliveira. White admitted he barely knew the details and left everything to Campbell. Then there were those text messages with Conor McGregor. White confessed he deleted them, but claimed they were personal conversations because he's completely out of business negotiations now. That's how dramatic this separation has been. Even when dealing with one of the biggest superstars in UFC history, White says the business stuff isn't his problem anymore. Helwani broke it down in concrete terms. He said virtually none of the fights or contracts happening in the UFC get put together by Dana White these days.
As fans of the UFC, we can no longer blame Dana White for the problems that the UFC is facing today. Dana White revealed in court yesterday that Hunter Campbell is the one negotiating fighter contracts, and he's also the one that is handling the UFC matchmaking. This just goes to show the obvious.
Judge Boulware wasn't buying White's explanations for all those missing messages though. The judge made it clear he was skeptical and dropped hints about potential sanction. He called out inconsistencies in how the UFC has been preserving evidence and suggested the organization's handling of devices could result in serious penalties. Campbell and other executives testified the following day, but everyone kept talking about White's bombshell admission. The guy who built the UFC brand just told a federal judge under oath that he no longer handles the two most crucial aspects of running the company. For a lot of fans, this revelation immediately reframed every single problem they've been seeing in the UFC lately.
And, you know, the way it was described to me when he came on board after Lorenzo left, like he was going to be the yin to Dana's yang, and he was going to be the quote-unquote bad cop, and that he's going to be the one, you know, on the front lines doing these deals.
That phrase
So if White isn't making the fights or hammering out the deals, who stepped up to fill that massive void, and when exactly did this transition happen? The answer is Hunter Campbell, and his rise to power tells the whole story. White kept pointing to Campbell throughout that courtroom testimony, not as some advisor or helper, but as the person who genuinely controls the operational machinery of the UFC. The contracts, the matchmaking, the daily grind of putting fights together, and Campbell didn't just stumble into this position. He was strategically placed there at a pivotal moment in the company's evolution and has been quietly building his influence ever since. Campbell originally worked with the UFC as a legal consultant before coming back in 2017 with significantly more authority. That timing wasn't random. It happened immediately after the Fertitta brothers sold the UFC to Endeavor in 2016 and walked away completely. Lorenzo Fertitta had been deeply embedded in business operations, contract negotiations, matchmaking decisions, strategic planning, and when he left, the UFC faced a serious operational gap. White remained the public face and official CEO, but the organization was evolving from a privately owned fight promotion into something far more corporate. Someone had to manage all that machinery. Campbell got thrown into high-stakes fighter negotiations from his very first week back, establishing the groundwork for everything that came after. Helwani explained exactly how Campbell was positioned from day one, specifically recruited to balance White's media-facing responsibilities while operating entirely behind the scenes.
And he essentially also said that Hunter Campbell is the man for that. And my take on that is, I told you so. I've been telling you this for a long time. Hunter Campbell is the straw that stirs this drink.
This perfectly captures how the whole dynamic shifted. White transformed into the ambassador, the guy who handles press conferences and media appearances and shows up on camera. Campbell became the person who actually answers the phone when managers start talking money. By 2019, Campbell got promoted to Chief Business Officer, which basically made official what had already been happening for years. Campbell focuses on the biggest deals, championship fights, pay-per-view headliners, contracts involving serious money in complex terms. Many people in the industry stress that Campbell isn't just another executive. He's been called the most important person in the entire organization.
It's not Dana reaching out. It's not. Very few of the managers talk to Dana. You know, we know about the ones who have, close personal relationships with him, but very, very, very few actually talk and negotiate to Dana.
Campbell's own court testimony the day after White's appearance revealed even more. He discussed the UFC's unsuccessful attempt to sign kickboxer Rico Verhoeven, exactly the kind of talent acquisition conversation that White would have personally handled in the old days. Now it falls completely under Campbell's authority. He manages relationships with athletic commissions around the world. He handles crisis situations like last-minute fight card changes. He negotiates contract extensions and sorts out disputes when things get messy between the promotion and its fighters. The scope of his responsibilities has created a growing understanding inside and outside the sport that Campbell effectively controls the fight business side of the UFC. Before that 2016 sale, UFC matchmaking involved White, Lorenzo Fertitta, Joe Silva, and Sean Shelby working together. After the sale, as the organization became more professional under Endeavor's ownership, White started directing fighter inquiries and deal-making straight to Campbell's team. He basically removed himself from routine involvement by around 2018. The roster now includes over 700 athletes. The event schedule runs non-stop with roughly 45 events per year. Managing all that complexity demands specialized expertise, and Campbell's legal background gives him the tools to handle the contract side, while his strategic thinking shapes the matchmaking. Helwani confirmed that managers and fighters have understood this reality for years. When they need to talk business, it's Campbell on the other end of the line, not White.
Hunter Campbell is the one responsible for the low fighter pay, and he's also responsible for the awful UFC matchmaking lately. To me, I believe that I owe Dana White an apology because Hunter Campbell is the one responsible for running the UFC into the ground lately. I truly believe that if Dana White was still in charge of the UFC today, that the UFC would be in a much better place in regards to fan experience. Yes, I am glad that we can now watch the UFC on Paramount instead of having to pay $80 for a pay-per-view, but at what cost? The cards are very diluted these days, and that just stinks as a UFC fan.
One fan account perfectly summarized what this means for the current state of the product. If Campbell is actually running everything, then all the frustrations fans have with matchmaking and fighter pay should be directed at his desk, not White's.
It was incredibly unfortunate timing, I guess, in terms of the launch of a slap league. I mean, do you think that's going to impact what happens with that, or is it good to go?
There is no good or bad timing for what I did. You know what I mean? There's irony, very ironic, but there's no good or bad timing for what I did on New Year's Eve.
But Campbell's rise didn't happen in a vacuum. It occurred within a massive corporate restructuring that completely changed who has control over everything above the UFC level. And that restructuring explains exactly why White's role looks the way it does now. In September 2023, the UFC stopped being an independent fight promotion. It merged with WWE under a new publicly traded company called TKO Group Holdings, now listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Endeavor Group Holdings controlled approximately 51% of TKO. Former WWE shareholders owned the remaining 49%. The McMahon family lost their majority control over WWE, and the UFC became one division inside a huge sports entertainment corporation with corporate governance structures, board committees, quarterly earnings reports, and institutional investors analyzing every move. The person running TKO isn't Dana White, it's Ari Emanuel, serving as executive chairman and CEO. Below Emanuel sits Mark Shapiro as president and chief operating officer, handling day-to-day integration across TKO's expanding portfolio. By 2025, that portfolio included not just UFC and WWE, but also professional bull riders, On Location and ING. By early 2026, TKO Group controlled around 33 major subsidiaries operating in 8 countries. This is no longer a fight promotion run by one guy and his partners. This is a multi-billion-dollar corporation with multiple layers of executives, compliance requirements, and legal obligations to shareholders. Dana White sits on the TKO board of directors in a limited role connected to his UFC leadership, but he doesn't control voting power. He kept his title as CEO of the UFC division. Nick Khan runs WWE. On paper, this setup gives White considerable independence. In reality, the corporate structure above him establishes the boundary. Decisions about media rights, revenue strategy, and expansion plans get made within a framework where White is one voice among many. That's completely different from the days when he and the Fertitta brothers could make every decision themselves. Then there's his Meta board position. In January 2025, White got elected to the board of directors at Meta Platforms alongside John L. Khan and Charlie Songhurst. He received an initial stock package worth over $1 million. This role involves strategic oversight and advisory input for one of the world's largest technology companies. That's another set of major responsibilities pulling his attention away from the UFC. And then there's Power Slap. White launched this slap fighting promotion in 2022 and has turned it into a profitable business. It secured a television deal with TBS, hosts events at the UFC Apex and Fontainebleau in Las Vegas, and landed sponsorship deals with companies like VeChain. Another Fontainebleau event is scheduled for March 2026. White addressed the Power Slap venture during a press conference after the New Year's Eve incident with his wife in January 2023 when a reporter asked whether the timing would impact the new league.
Are there any repercussions planned from the company or self-imposed repercussions?
Yeah, well, I mean, what should the repercussions be? You tell me. I take 30 days off? How does that hurt me? I mean, I told you guys when we were going through COVID could last 10 years. I could sit it out and, you know what I mean? What would be the problem? It's much like COVID, actually. You know, me leaving hurts the company, hurts my employees, hurts the fighters. Doesn't hurt me. I could have left in 2016.
That same press conference demonstrated White's approach to personal crises. Face the media, say what needs to be said, then move forward. When asked whether there would be any consequences from the company or any self-imposed punishment, White brushed off the idea.
By that, he's still involved in the top line stuff, but there are a ton of other people involved now. It used to be a very small team. There's the whole TKO team, there's the whole Endeavor team, and obviously there's people like Hunter Campbell there.
That comment about how he could have left in 2016 means something totally different now. Because based on his own court testimony, in many ways he did leave. Not officially, not publicly, but practically speaking, the essential responsibilities of running the UFC moved out of his control right around that time. By December 2025, White had signed a 5-year contract extension, keeping him in position through at least 2031. He stated publicly and repeatedly that retirement isn't happening. But the real question isn't whether Dana White will stay with the UFC anymore. The question is what staying actually means when someone else is handling the work. Helwani addressed this point when he acknowledged that while White has stepped back from the front lines, the world surrounding the UFC has grown dramatically.
You know, if you look at some of these guys that are in this thing, some of them are when we were in the hole, however much money. And it's like the early days of baseball. Like the money that's being made now is much more than the money that was made then 10 years from now. And you can't control how people are going to spend their money. It happens in the NBA, it happens in the NFL, it happens in Major League Baseball.
White is no longer buried in UFC details. He's operating above them, managing a portfolio that includes boxing, technology, and slap fighting. And the lawsuits that put him in that witness chair are about to test whether the corporate structure he now operates within was designed to serve fighters or control them.
I have heard from fighters who have gotten their payments and they're happy with it. So this is a this is a gift. This is something that a lot of fighters who are maybe struggling or who are hoping to get a little extra cash now on the back end of their career post-fighting, this is something they're very thankful for and very excited about. Even though they may not say it, and even though some of them may be a little trepidatious, they are all very, very happy about the payments.
Dana White didn't volunteer any of this information about his diminished role. He revealed it under oath because fighters sued the UFC and a federal judge forced him to answer questions. The antitrust lawsuits that brought White into that courtroom have been developing for over a decade, and they represent the most serious legal threat the promotion has ever encountered. The story starts in December 2014 when former fighters, including Kung Lei, John Fitch, Nathan Corey, Brandon Vera, and others filed a class action antitrust lawsuit against Zuffa LLC. Their complaint accused the UFC of violating sections 1 and 2 of the Sherman Antitrust Act through a deliberate plan to suppress fighter pay and destroy competition. They argued the UFC controlled over 90% of the market for elite professional MMA fighter services, and that fighters only captured 15 to 20% of event revenues compared to roughly 50% in similar sports like boxing or major American leagues. That case, Lee vs. Zuffa, covered fights from December 2010 to June 2017. It took over a decade to resolve. In August 2024, Judge Boulware granted class certification for approximately 1,200 fighters. In early 2025, the UFC agreed to a $37.5 million settlement, one of the largest in sports antitrust history. Payments went to eligible fighters based on how many fights they had, their earnings, and the impact on their careers. Some received seven-figure amount, others got payments in the tens of thousands. Dana White addressed the lawsuit publicly, comparing the situation to how pay evolved in other sports.
So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. You know, the previous class action lawsuit covered up until 2016, 2017. And so there's still a lot more years to come. And I know that there are a lot of fighters banking on that.
But that $375 million settlement came with one major limitation. It only included monetary compensation, no injunctive provisions requiring changes to the UFC's business practices. That's exactly why two more lawsuits are still active as of February 2026. Johnson vs. Zuffa, filed in 2021 by Kajan Johnson and others, extends the class period from July 2017 forward. Serkinov vs. Zuffa, led by former light heavyweight Misha Serkinov, makes similar allegations about ongoing anti-competitive behavior. The Johnson case seeks something the first lawsuit didn't pursue: permanent injunctive relief. That means the fighters aren't just asking for money this time. They're asking a federal court to force the UFC to change how it structures contracts and conducts business. The stakes are completely different now. Fighters who received payments from the first settlement were thankful, even if they had to be careful about saying so publicly. Helwani discussed this on his show.
These guys have trained hard and got ready for this fight. What happened on New Year's Eve is my mistake, not theirs. And obviously, nobody's more about free speech than me. If somebody, if one of the fighters wants to come out and voice their opinion on it and whatever it might be, then by all means. I'm sure you guys have seen the TMZ video and seen my interview. It was obviously a horrible personal experience, and there's no excuses for it.
The February 2026 spoliation hearing was part of these continuing cases. Plaintiffs claimed that the UFC and its executives failed to preserve massive amounts of text messages, emails, and other communications, especially those involving key decision makers, despite litigation holds in effect since at least 2014. Judge Boulware pointed out inconsistencies in evidence production and indicated that potential sanctions could include adverse inference instructions, which would let jurors assume that any missing evidence would have hurt the UFC's case. If that ruling happens, it could shift the entire litigation in the fighter's favor. White's confession about his reduced role only makes the fighter's argument stronger. If the CEO has zero involvement in contracts or matchmaking, then the system runs automatically, a corporate machine that maintains market control without any individual being directly responsible for what fighters earn. Hilwani observed that the previous settlement covered through 2016 and 2017, but there are still years of alleged misconduct left to litigate.
There's no proof that he's done this yet, but I can tell you this, it doesn't look good. It definitely doesn't look good. You know, we approached him before the fight, he and his lawyer, and they denied that anything, you know, from everything. Are you hurt? You know, are you injured in any way? Do you owe people money? Have you been asked to do anything, you know, illegal? We asked them all the questions and everything was absolutely not, hell no. So the fight went on. And then, like I said, fight ended by finish in the first round, literally walked out from the octagon into my room in the back and called the FBI.
The personal controversies White has dealt with over the years haven't helped his public image as these lawsuits move forward. The New Year's Eve 2023 incident with his wife Anne, recorded on video at a nightclub in Cabo San Lucas, generated widespread criticism. White addressed it at a press conference before UFC events in January 2023, accepting full responsibility and refusing to let anyone make excuses for him.
Consider the logic, right? We're talking about gambling. What kind of gamble would it be to risk $7.7 billion in rights fees on a few $1 million? Like, it just does not make sense. There would be, you'd have to be absolutely insane. You'd have to be self-sabotaging to be involved in this from a UFC.
Endeavor and ESPN imposed no formal punishment. White stayed in his position. The incident, combined with a 2015 sex tape extortion case that got resolved through the courts by October 2020, represents periods of personal turmoil that contrast with the image White projects as the face of the UFC. Neither incident caused lasting professional damage, but they provide context for a man whose public image and private reality have grown increasingly separate. And while the lawsuits continue grinding forward and personal controversies pile up, the UFC has been managing another crisis that attacks the credibility of the fights themselves.
The UFC benefits a great deal from being the primary fight provider of all of MMA, right? They benefit greatly from how many people they have on the roster, for how many fights they do, for how much activity they do. And there's a lot, oftentimes, that people say, instead of MMA, say the UFC. This is the downside. When things go shitty, this is what happens as well, right? This is the other edge of that sword, which is you benefit greatly from MMA being equal to UFC in most people's eyes.
While Dana White was in court discussing his role and deleted text messages, the UFC was handling a different problem that threatens the sport's legitimacy. Starting in mid-2025 and getting worse into early 2026, a series of betting integrity crises hit the promotion. Suspicious betting patterns, last-minute fight cancellations, fighter releases, and an FBI investigation that's still ongoing. The problems emerged as the UFC's partnerships with sports betting platforms like DraftKings and FanDuel were generating serious revenue but also creating new weaknesses. The most notable incident involved bantamweights Christian Delgarian and Juan Del Valle, scheduled to fight at UFC 3024 on December 14, 2025. Hours before the event, unusual betting movements were detected. Heavy money came in on Del Valle as an underdog, prompting the UFC's integrity team to cancel the fight. The Nevada State Athletic Commission flagged the irregularities. An FBI investigation launched in January 2026, focusing on whether fighters or their teams had leaked inside information to manipulate odds. Delgarian got released. Del Valle was suspended. Multiple fights got pulled from other cards at UFC 3020 in October 2025 and UFC 3027 in January 2020. At least 5 fighters were released between November 2025 and February 2026. White spoke to TMZ about the situation and said the UFC approached the fighter before the bout, asked direct questions, and got promises that nothing was wrong. Then the fight unfolded in a way that looked suspicious.
There's going to be no more pay-per-views. All the events are going to be available for everybody for free. Every pay-per-view, every fight card that they have from the Apex, which are my favorite.
Yeah.
Everything is going to be available for free. It's an amazing deal.
Helwani's panel talked about the story and agreed that the UFC itself isn't behind any of this. The logic doesn't add up. Why would a promotion risk everything it's built for a few fixed fights? One panelist stated it clearly.
$10. So if it's let's say it's $10. That's crazy. That's $120 a year. You could watch every UFC pay-per-view. 2 UFC pay-per-views is like $140, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it? Aren't they
Yeah,
like
I think
$70?
it's like $70, yeah.
So you get all of them. Everything's free. That's incredible.
But the panel also raised a point about responsibility. The UFC benefits from being identical with MMA, and that means when problems hit the sport, they damage the UFC's reputation most severely. The gambling crisis is playing out alongside the biggest business deal in UFC history. On August 11, 2025, TKO Group Holdings announced a 7-year, $7.7 billion media rights deal with Paramount. The agreement completely eliminates pay-per-view in the US market. Starting in 2026, every UFC event, all 13 numbered cards, and all 30 fight nights becomes available on Paramount Plus at no extra cost beyond a standard subscription. Select events also broadcast on CBS. The deal expanded in October 2025 to include Latin America and Australia for the same 7-year period. It doubles the annual revenue from the previous ESPN partnership. Joe Rogan discussed how the deal would transform the sport. He said every single event being available for the price of a streaming subscription would blow the doors wide open. Rogan's co-host agreed and explained how the economics benefit fans. 2 pay-per-views used to cost more than an entire year of Paramount Plus. Now every fight is included. So here's where everything stands right now. Dana White's name is still on the building. His title still says CEO, but his hands aren't controlling anything, and by his own admission under oath, they haven't been for years. Thanks for watching. If you found this breakdown valuable, check out one of the videos playing on your screen for more analysis like this.